There comes a moment when you stare at your ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering how much longer you can keep going. You've tried, God knows you've tried, but nothing seems to work. You're tired, lost, empty. You feel like you've given everything you had, and it still wasn't enough. That moment, that breaking point, was where I found myself. I was standing at the edge of my life, figuratively, maybe even literally. Everything that had once given me meaning seemed to vanish. My job no longer fulfilled me. My relationships were breaking down. My body was tired, my soul even more so. And worst of all, I felt utterly alone. What do you do when even hope feels like a burden? Most people don't talk about this stage of life. It's not depression. Exactly. It's not just burnout either. It's deeper. It's spiritual disintegration. I didn't know then, but I was going through something mystics and spiritual seekers call the dark night of the soul. But in that moment, it just felt like failure. A slow, suffocating descent into despair. Maybe I'm just weak. Maybe everyone else figured it out, and I'm the only one broken. That thought looped in my mind like a broken record. It was cruel, but it was also familiar. Before I tell you what saved me, I need to tell you how deep the darkness went. Because I know many of you watching this might still be there. Maybe you're wondering if there's a point to all this pain. Maybe you're holding on by the thinnest thread. Maybe you've already let go and you're still here, floating in that strange, numb void. This story is for you. I want to walk you through my journey, moment by moment, not as some grand triumph, but as a testimony of what it means to fall apart and somehow survive. I still remember the day vividly. It was raining, not the kind of romantic, cinematic rain, but a relentless, cold, miserable downpour that felt like the sky itself had given up. I was curled up on the floor of my apartment. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. My rent was late. My bank account was overdrawn. My inbox was full of people asking for things I couldn't give. I can't do this anymore, I whispered, and I meant it. That was the first time I admitted it out loud. But strangely, saying it brought a moment of peace. That same night, I picked up a notebook that had been sitting untouched on my desk. It wasn't planned. I don't even remember why I did it, but something in me, a whisper maybe said, just right. So I did. Not well, not poetically, just, honestly, I'm exhausted. I feel invisible. I don't want to be here. I don't know who I am anymore. Those were the first lines. They weren't pretty, but they were real. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not relief, not joy, just a tiny crack in the numbness. That crack was enough to let in the smallest flicker of light. Healing rarely begins the way we imagine. It doesn't come with a lightning strike or a sudden revelation. Sometimes it starts with silence, with stillness, with paying attention to what we usually ignore. In the days that followed my breakdown, I didn't suddenly bounce back. There were no grand gestures, no miracle moments, just small shifts. One of the first things I noticed was how uncomfortable I had become with stillness. The silence in my apartment felt oppressive. Every quiet moment brought up emotions I didn't want to face. So, like I had written in my notebook, I just sat with it. I stopped trying to fix everything, stopped fighting the pain. For the first time, I let myself simply be without judgment, without solutions. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. I started to hear what I'd been drowning out for years. It wasn't a loud voice, more like a whisper. It said things like, "You've been carrying too much for too long. It's okay to rest. You don't have to prove your worth. You're allowed to be human." These weren't things I'd ever believed before. They felt foreign, almost suspicious, but they were also comforting in a way I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, I forced myself to go outside, not for any deep reason, just because the walls in my apartment were starting to feel like they were closing in. I walked to a nearby park, no headphones, no distractions, just me and the world. I sat on a bench and watched the trees move in the wind. It sounds simple, even cliché, but in that moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed in a long time. The world was still turning. Birds were still singing. The sun still rose and set. Trees still stood tall, even after storms. And somehow, that reminded me I was part of that world. I was allowed to still be here, even if I didn't feel okay. Nature became one of my first true teachers. It asked nothing of me. It simply welcomed me. I began to read. Not the motivational books or the fix yourself in 10 days kind of stuff. I was done with that. I found writings by mystics, poets, and people who knew what the dark night felt like. People like Rainer Maria Rilke, Khalil Gibran, Henry Nouwen, even Saint John of the Cross. These weren't people offering easy answers. They didn't try to cheer me up. Instead, they told the truth. They wrote about sorrow, about loneliness, about being lost and how those experiences weren't signs of failure, but signs of transformation. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Rainer Maria Rilke. That one line stayed with me. No feeling is final. This might sound strange, but one of the greatest teachers I encountered was my own pain. For years, I tried to avoid it, bury it, numb it. But pain has a strange kind of honesty. It doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. And once I stopped running from it, I realized it had been trying to tell me something all along. You're exhausted because you never rest. You feel unseen because you never show your real self. You feel lost because you've been living someone else's story. It wasn't easy hearing those truths, but they were liberating. Pain, when faced with compassion, becomes a kind of compass. It shows you where you've been wounded, where you've abandoned yourself, where healing is needed most. Day by day, I started to feel small shifts in how I moved through the world. I didn't suddenly become happy. I didn't wake up with energy and motivation, but I began to feel grounded, present. I noticed the taste of food again, the way light moved through my window, the softness of my blanket at night, the way a friend's voice made me smile even if just a little. These weren't breakthroughs, they were returns, a coming back to life. Sometimes the things that save us aren't grand or heroic. They're small, quiet, and often overlooked, but they are no less powerful. The dark night didn't lift suddenly. It didn't announce its departure, but piece by piece, something new was forming in me, something deeper, something truer. I was no longer searching for escape. I was learning how to stay with myself, with life, even when it hurt. People love stories of comebacks, dramatic turnarounds, phoenixes rising from the ashes. But my return wasn't like that. It was quiet, uneven, messy. Some days I felt okay. Other days I was right back in the dark. But the difference now was, I didn't hate myself for it. I didn't see it as failure. I saw it as part of the healing. That, in itself, was a victory. One of the most powerful parts of healing was identifying what I needed to unlearn. There were beliefs I had carried for years unconsciously that kept me stuck in pain. My worth depends on my productivity. If I rest, I'm lazy. If I'm struggling, it means I'm broken. I can't show my weakness or I'll be abandoned. These weren't just mental ideas. They had become rules I lived by, harsh, rigid rules, and those rules had burned me out. So, little by little, I began to challenge them. I'd whisper to myself, rest is not laziness. You're not your to-do list. Struggling doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. You are still lovable, even when you're not strong. I didn't believe those words at first, but I said them anyway, every day, until they began to feel a little less foreign, a little more like home. I used to be my own worst critic. The way I talked to myself inside my head, I would never speak that way to a friend. If I made a mistake, I'd call myself an idiot. If I felt sad, I'd shame myself. If I wanted to rest, I'd guilt trip myself. So I made a choice. I would start speaking to myself like someone I love. This was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because it meant rewriting decades of mental habits. But over time, it became one of the most life-changing. I started to ask, what would I say to a dear friend who felt this way? And then I said that. To me, for a long time, I isolated myself. I didn't want to burden anyone. I didn't think anyone would understand. I feared being seen in my pain, but loneliness deepened suffering, and slowly, I realized connection is not a luxury, it's a lifeline. I reached out awkwardly, imperfectly. I told one trusted friend what I'd been going through. Their response was simple, but powerful. I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. That moment cracked something open in me. It reminded me that being seen doesn't require being perfect. Sometimes, the most healing thing is simply having someone witness your pain without trying to fix it. So I allowed myself to lean on others. Not everyone understood, but a few did, and that was enough. When I was at my lowest, everything that once brought me joy felt meaningless. But as I began to heal, I started to revisit old loves, not because I was better, but because I was curious. I picked up a guitar again, scribbled poems in a notebook, sat with a cup of tea, and watched the rain. These weren't grand moments, but they made me feel alive. I began to follow what felt gentle, not what felt impressive. And strangely, that's what slowly brought me back to life. Small joys, not big achievements. One of the hardest things to accept was that healing wasn't linear. I wanted to be done, to feel fixed, but the process didn't work that way. Remember, some days I woke up full of hope. Other days, the grief hit me like a wave. I used to think this meant I was going backward, but eventually, I realized healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. We revisit our pain at deeper levels each time, but each time, we return with more wisdom, more strength, more grace. You don't heal by becoming a new person. You heal by returning to the truth of who you always were before the world told you otherwise. What saved me from giving up wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 quiet choices. Choosing to rest instead of run, choosing truth over performance, choosing to be kind to myself when I felt most unworthy. It wasn't dramatic. It was deeply human, and it was enough. It's strange. When you're inside the darkness, it feels like pure suffering, meaningless, cruel, endless. But when you've walked through it and you look back, something surprising happens. You start to see gifts, not because the pain wasn't real, not because it was good, but because in its raw, devastating honesty, it stripped away everything false, and what was left was real. Before my breakdown, I didn't understand other people's pain. I thought I did. I said the right things, but deep down, I still judged. I thought, why can't they just try harder? Or, if I can handle it, why can't they? But after I fell apart, I could never think that way again. Now, when someone tells me they're struggling, I don't offer solutions. I don't tell them to cheer up. I sit with them. I understand that sometimes just surviving is an act of courage, because I've been there. The darkness taught me compassion, not as a concept, but as a deep knowing in my bones. I used to believe I was in control, that if I just worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, performed perfectly enough, I could avoid collapse. The dark night shattered that illusion. It showed me how fragile I really was, and strangely, that humbled me in the best way. I stopped pretending I had it all together. I stopped demanding perfection from myself and others. I started to allow space for failure, rest, and imperfection. The world didn't fall apart when I stopped holding it together. And in that humility, I found freedom. Before, I had a kind of faith that was based on reward. If I do good, God will be there. If I pray, answers will come. But when prayer stopped working, when the answers didn't come, I felt abandoned. Only later did I realize what had died was false faith. What was born was real faith. The kind of faith that doesn't depend on outcomes, that survives the silence, that trusts even when nothing makes sense. A faith not in everything being okay, but in being held, even when everything is not okay. That kind of faith cannot be shaken, because it was forged in fire. I used to carry so much old stories, expectations, guilt, the need to prove myself, the fear of being unloved. But pain forced my hands open. I had to let go, not because I wanted to, but because I had no strength left to cling. And in that release, I found space. Space for truth, for softness, for new beginnings. Letting go didn't feel like losing. It felt like finally breathing. The dark night stripped me down to my core. When you've lost everything you thought defined you, your achievements, your roles, your sense of identity, what's left is something raw and true. What saved me from giving up wasn't pretending I was okay. It was admitting I wasn't. It was telling the truth, even when it was messy and uncomfortable. That honesty cost me some relationships, but it gave me myself. And now, I won't trade that authenticity for anything. I used to see someone who needed to be fixed. Now, I see someone who survived, someone who broke open and grew through it, someone who walked through the valley and came out more human, not less. And even though I would never wish that pain on anyone, I'm grateful for what it revealed. The love that doesn't leave ache, the strength in surrender, the wisdom in wounds, the truth that I am enough even in pieces. There was a time I thought I would never make it through, that I was too broken, too lost. But now, I look back and see it wasn't the end. It was the breaking open. And in that breaking, something softer, truer, deeper was born. That is what saved me from giving up. If you're watching this and you're still in the thick of it, if the prayers have gone quiet, if your hope feels like a distant memory, if you're barely holding on, let me say this clearly. From one survivor to another, you are not alone. Not now, not ever. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but your breath this very moment is proof that something deeper in you still wants to live. And that is holy. I know it feels like you're dying. In some ways, you are, but what's dying is not you. It's everything that no longer serves the truth of who you are. The ego, the roles, the masks, the false beliefs. The dark night of the soul isn't a punishment. It's a purification. And though it feels like you're being destroyed, what's actually happening is that you're being reborn. Please don't believe the voice that says you're too far gone, that no one could love you as you are, that your life no longer matters. That voice is a liar, and it's scared because it knows what's coming. It knows that if you make it through, you'll be more powerful than ever before, more real, more grounded, more loving, more you. This is not the end of your story. It's the part where the real story begins. Let me say the words I once needed someone to say to me. I see you. I believe you. I believe in you. You are not weak for struggling. You are brave for surviving. You do not have to be okay to be worthy of love. Even in your darkest night, you are still the light. When everything else falls away, find even one thing to anchor to. A friend who listens, a line from a poem, a note you write to your future self, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, a single breath in and out. That may be enough for today, and that is enough. This journey is not a sprint. You are not required to be heroic every moment of every day. Some days, surviving is the miracle. Some days, not giving up is the prayer. Some days, getting out of bed is the victory. Let it be enough. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to be gentle with yourself. Healing takes time. And no, you're not behind. You're not failing. You are healing in ways you may not even see yet. There is a version of you quietly waiting on the other side of this darkness. They don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to keep going. And when you finally meet them, you'll understand why this pain was not the end. You'll see how it carved space inside you. Space that could now hold more joy, more truth, more love than ever before. Not despite the suffering because of it all, to the one barely holding on. Please stay. Not because everything will magically get better overnight, but because there is a deeper you that is being born right now. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the ache. You may not see it yet, but one day you will look back and say, that was the moment everything began to change. Don't give up. Your story is not over, and the light, it's closer than you think.